Good evening, everyone. We get to meet a new author tonight, new to us anyway, which I find extremely exciting. And as soon as I get this little thing off my screen, whatever it was, I hate that when that comes in. Michelle Richmond, author of this marvelous book, The Wonder Test, which is our September crime book of the month, which means we have a subscription club and those members automatically get a book every month that we think is one of the most fun and interesting, best written, marvelous books of the month. Patrick, you want to show off our signed copies?
Yeah, there we go.
Yay. So Michelle, thank you very much for doing that for us.
Thank you.
It's nice and legible too.
As opposed to Michael Connelly and the two scrawls, or Robert Parker towards the end where it could have been a snake. Sound signatures can deteriorate. In any case, just while I'm talking about it, one of the advantages to our subscription club, and this is a thing that people may not easily distinguish, a first edition of a book remains a first edition through multiple printings, unless the author for some reason decides to revise it and there's some material change in it. A first printing is the first, obviously the first printing, and there can be multiple printings, sometimes running up into the 90s or hundreds of printings and so forth. The only collectible printing is the first printing of the first edition. But oftentimes people say it's a signed first edition, and that's really not correct. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Do you know why? Do you know why the first? Well,
I'm really learning stuff that you'd think I would know this by now.
Well, no particular reason. The reason the first printing is the most valuable and collectible edition is back when Mr. Gutenberg made movable type. It was made out of metal, and it went into a press, an old wine press, and it came down crunch. And so the metal deteriorated. So the first printing was the most legible, the most perfect copy. And every time thereafter, it's slightly degraded, which of course is nonsense today in an era of electronic printing and so forth. But basically, if you have an autographed first edition, it means one, you were smart enough to find this book before it became a super seller, or two, you paid a whole lot of money to buy it after you realized that in fact, you should have bought it when it came out that way. So we try to take the pain out of it for a book like Michelle's and present you with the most collectible copy. So there.
I love that.
Thank you. And I will go on to say that one of the reasons I was so interested in the Wonder Test is that I'm not sure that Michelle was a crime writer by nature, or at least by the start, because I looked up and saw that you have written other books.
Mm-hmm. It's true. This is my 8th book, 6th novel, because 2 of them were story collections. And I've had books with a mystery in them before, but this is the first one that I think, well, my last one, The Marriage Pact, definitely had a crime element, but I think this one gets closer to that than any of the previous books.
I had the same conversation with Jean Hanff Corliss, whose marvelous book, The Plot, which came out in May, was our crime book of the month back in May. And Jean also said that she was not a crime writer, but it just turned out that somehow or other the story lent itself to being a mystery. So she's somewhat surprised. That,
I loved The Plot, by the way.
Wasn't it a wonderful book?
Yeah, that was a great book. It was so...
I forgot my pitch.
Yep, I was just coming to you. Sorry, I got carried away. So let me revert back to Patrick, who has a little pitch he has to make before he vanishes from the screen for a while.
Yeah, my pitch is just that we've obviously said we have signed copies of The Wonder Test in stock at the Poison Pen, and I will put a link in the comments field if you'd like to purchase one. And I'll also be monitoring that. So if you have questions for Michelle, go ahead and put them in, and I will reemerge towards the end of the hour and be happy to ask any questions you might have. There's my pitch.
Thank you, Patrick.
And so I'm going to drink a toast to you, Michelle. What a pleasure it is to meet you. BYOB, the way to go. I am glad that you like The Plot. I was absolutely fascinated by it. And I love The Wonder Test in part because the area that you're writing about, which you will be explaining to us, I first went to it, San Francisco and its environments, in 1958. when I was a freshman at Stanford, and it bears no relation whatsoever to the modern city. It was very formal. It was very conservative. People distinguished it from Los Angeles on that basis. It was a lot more like Boston than it was like LA. And by the time I finished graduate work and moved on, we had Haight-Ashbury, we had the Vietnam War, we had an enormous change. But then Michelle's book, which is absolutely wonderful, The Wonder Test, is also dealing with the enormous change that the tech industry and Silicon Valley brought. So honestly, Michelle, when I read it, I hardly recognized the place because my memory of it is so completely different. How long have you lived there, and has it changed dramatically in your time?
It has. So we moved I'm from the South, and my parents actually were stationed in San Francisco during the Haight-Ashbury era because my dad was in the Navy. But the FBI moved me and my husband here from New York City in 1999. My husband grew up here, but when I met him and agreed to move to New York with him for his job, I said, yes, but only if we get to eventually go to San Francisco. So we moved to San Francisco in 1999. And out of that San Francisco with the fog and the beach and just sort of this very coastal place I came to love came the year of fog. And then 10 years later, we moved to down the peninsula to a small town that's halfway between San Francisco and Palo Alto. And it's it was a culture shock for me, even though it's a 20-minute drive from San Francisco to the town that we live in now. It was a culture shock 10 years ago. And I think the place where I live on the peninsula, which is very close to Silicon Valley, and there's a lot of Silicon Valley people here because of its proximity to Palo Alto. It's even changed since I got here, but there's definitely a high octane, high energy, aggressive achievement culture here that is quite different from the San Francisco I knew, because in San Francisco, I was just enmeshed in the writers community, which was probably similar, more similar to San Francisco a decade or two before. It was just very artistic and vibrant and sort of free and wonderful, although there was the encroachment of the economy that made it difficult for writers to live there. But so I have seen, and when I go back to San Francisco now, it looks different than the San Francisco we left only 10 years ago. And I'm there all the time because I still love it. And we go there to eat, or I go there to go to the beach, but it is a rapidly evolving place. But that's kind of part of what makes San Francisco so interesting. The landscape is always equally beautiful, no matter what changes the city goes through.
Well, it is a gorgeous city. And of course, it's also the city of Dashiell Hammett, and, can be mysterious and so forth. But, when I read your book, I was thinking of Atherton, but, it's just a big old money enclave and, home to vast estates and so forth. It was very much a moneyed community. But then Menlo Park is, as you come down the peninsula from San Francisco to Palo Alto, as Michelle suggests, each community is quite different. In fact, Mountain View was a little kind of blue collar, adjunct to Palo Alto right below it. And that was before Google and everybody moved in.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure I wouldn't even recognize it at this point.
Yeah. And I do mention in the book, I mention Burlingame quite a bit. And my husband grew up in Burlingame when it was a totally different place than it is now, a very working class place. And it has since become a really very expensive place where young families move to. And that has changed so much from when he was a kid, and like hippies living underneath the bridge by his house, chasing him and stuff. It was, that string of towns, they've all changed so much over the last few decades.
Absolutely true. And I brought all this up because it's an important component of the wonder test. But let's talk about how your character got there. Her name is Lena Connerly.
Mhm.
And now that I know your husband's an FBI agent, I am less surprised that Lena is in fact an FBI agent who's, well, you tell it. Why is she in California instead of where she was?
So Lena Connerly is, she has been an FBI agent for 16 years, and she's been stationed in New York City, where she lived with her husband and her son, Rory. And at the time the book opens, Rory is 15 years old, and she grew up, Lena grew up sort of down the hill in a working class neighborhood from the town of Greenfield, where her father, after she left, sort of moved up the hill through working very hard at his Jaguar mechanic shop. But at any rate, she has come back to Greenfield from New York City because her husband, Rory's father, has suddenly died. So, and she's had sort of a counterintelligence case that she was working in New York City go sideways. So she's taken a self-imposed leave of absence, sort of to get her mind back together after the death of her husband, a case that went sideways. And her husband and her father's also died after an illness. And she's come home. She's come back to this very fancy house that her father owned, and she's going to clean it out and try to get her life back together before deciding what to do next. So that is what brings her to Greenfield, California.
So she is suffering loss. She's grieving. She's kind of unmoored.
Yes.
And, you know, it's a really daunting task to try to sort out a life when somebody dies. We've recently lost my husband's brother and my much loved sister who died first, our brother-in-law. And it's astonishing the amount of work. And I'm a trustee of Gary's estate, and my brother is the executor, so we're working together. It's unbelievable how much detail there is to sort out. Just, I mean, we're not even talking things like wills and all that stuff, but I mean, trying to work out what to do with somebody's social media. What do you do with their charitable contributions? How do you stop all this stuff? You know, where do people really write down all the things that they do in terms of payments or donations, or, you know, my husband and I, after this experience, we made an inventory, a really serious inventory. We were both amazed when we got through who was paying for what. You know, who's paying for this streaming service and who's paying for that, and which of us is paying this utility bill? Because, you know, we all have different accounts and different, and so do you think, Michelle, that, you know, that having to do that is helpful for a grieving person, or is it just really burdensome?
Well, I think it's the sum of both. I mean, very daunting and burdensome, and also sort of, I think in some ways, a burden that one could feel guilt for feeling burdened by. Like she has all of her father, she has to get rid of her father's tools. She can't keep all of his tools. So you have that sense of, are you doing this person a disservice by donating something that was so important to them? I mean, it's not very easy to Marie Kondo someone else's life. It's hard enough to do it to your own life. But if you're grieving and you at the same time have to decide what to do with all these personal items on top of the things that you've just been talking about, the financial and social media and all of that, I think it can be an overwhelming burden. But I think Lena, because of who she is, she's a methodical person, and she has always been absorbed in and loved her work. And so even though the task is of trying to sort through her father's things is somewhat overwhelming, I think she finds some comfort in it, because she has always through work had her next step, and her work as an FBI agent was her identity. And now she's taken time off from that, and and because she's the only parent now, and she's used to having her husband Fred there as Rory's solid rock and as the more present parent. And so now she has to be the fully present parent, and she doesn't have the anchor of her work. So I think going through her father's things and trying to decide what to do with his home and all of those things actually gives her sort of structure to her day, as does this mystery that comes up in the small town that she has returned to.
I think you're absolutely right that the fact that it does give structure, it gives you a set of tasks that you have to perform, and a sense of accomplishment. And grief can be so unmooring that I think that it can be a helpful way to process your loss. Now, sometimes it can be surprising. Sometimes people find out things when they're going through this process of dismantling another person's life. And that's a whole direction that a story can go, I mean, there's certainly been cases, for example, 2 or 3 books, I can't remember the titles and doesn't really matter, but the basic premise is that a spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever it is on an airplane and the plane goes down, and who is it that they're traveling with? That has come up. And, I mean, so there's a whole, a whole way you can go. When somebody dies suddenly and unexpectedly, there are secrets that can be revealed. Or if you're going through somebody's personal papers and, their whole life, what if you uncovered, an account that you couldn't imagine? Whatever it might be, whether it's money, whether it's, love letters, whether, maybe there's proof of infidelity, maybe you're not really your parents' child. I mean, there's just so many things that can happen in that situation. I loved what you did with it. So what direction did you decide to go? Without spoilers. I know it's really hard because we can't talk much about the really great, some of the really great parts of the book.
Well, I think I can talk about sort of the beginning mystery without any spoilers. And that is that when Lena arrives, she enrolls her son Rory in the local public school, which is just this Silicon Valley pressure cooker that revolves around something called the Wonder Test, which is a standardized test that is absurd in its intensity and also in its just sort of the abstract, unanswerable nature of the questions asked by the test. But the students are put into a systematic study of how to ace this test. But anyway, so she enrolls her son Rory in this school, and the son is very adept and he sort of figures out the school very quickly. But she learns from a local cop named Kyle that a couple kids have gone missing and then returned weeks later under mysterious circumstances, very gaunt, bald, and not speaking about what has happened to them. So she gets drawn into this mystery. And that's really sort of that was my leaping off point for the book. I knew that I had a character who had lost her husband, had lost her father. I knew that it would be this small town that is based on the sort of towns that are part of my experience, right. But take it to a much more extreme level. And I knew that this mystery would happen when she arrived in town about what is happening to these kids, and she would get involved in that mystery. So that was sort of the jumping off point for the book. And I think, and you asked the great question at the beginning, have I written crime before? How did I end up writing crime? I think a lot of people set out to write about an FBI agent. I have, for 20 years of marriage and 25 years of partnership with an FBI agent, very specifically determined and decided not to write about an FBI agent, right. Because I felt that was his work and also very much our life. And that wasn't a place I wanted to go in fiction, but it's been long enough. And I decided now I would have my character, Lena Connerly, who is an FBI agent, and that I would in this book explore what that life is really like, and sort of the creative and intellectual work that goes into being an FBI agent. I mean, some agents are on a SWAT team, but more agents are doing intellectual, creative work every day, trying to solve crimes and trying to figure out the complexities and the many layers of complexities, and what motivates people and all of that. So that's kind of what I wanted to explore in this book.
I think you did an amazing job with it. Let me talk about the Wonder Test for a minute. I mean, were you looking at like an SAT test? I mean, maybe that's not what they're called anymore, but that's what I remember taking. Standardized test, but this is a local school district test, right? Not a standard national test.
Well, so the test, which is completely fictional, is a national test, but her son's school in this town of Greenfield has the best scores on the test in the country, for several years in a row. And it's not a college entrance test. So yes, kids still take the SAT and ACT, although this past year was different, of course, because of the pandemic. But so this is not a college entrance test. And I had finished the book before the college cheating scandal broke. And I was concerned that trying to go forward with this book, that people would think it's a college, this is about like a college cheating thing. And it's not that at all. And it's really not about kids behaving badly, and it's not even about kids trying to get into college. It's this test is emblematic of the town's excellence. The parents see it as a representation of themselves. The community sees it as a representation of its wealth and its sort of superiority as a place to live. So it's sort of takes the idea of standardized testing, but twists it to something else. Although I do think that in a lot of school districts that are affluent, the school's sort of star quality is often based on the students' performance on standardized tests. So that was sort of what I was thinking of with the test, is that the parents and the school and the whole town is putting these children through so much because the test represents them. So it's basically the kids are working for everybody else rather than for themselves.
Yeah, that's a very, very fair summation. I was thinking back to my high school in Winnetka, Illinois. 98% of us went to college, and we were all expected to do really well on the SATs. And then later I took the graduate SATs and then eventually the law school SATs. I mean, because there are various other ones that are created, but I don't remember that there was any pressure. It was internal, to do well. Wasn't pressure from the adults. It was more an internal thing, but I'm not sure that things operate that way anymore. I think we were, talking briefly to Joanna about this. Social media has really changed people and the way they look at the world, but it also means that everybody wants to have a curated story. And I think that has changed how parents regard their children to some extent. You probably read about the lawsuit about the baby who's on the cover of
Yes,
the record album and all, and now
yeah.
at age 30 he wants to sue, whatever. But see, nobody would have thought of it that way 30 years ago. And I think that your book updates the way I looked at them and the way this was all perceived in a very interesting way. When we originally, the store's 31 years old, and when we opened it and we began to do live events, which is pretty much right away, people would come and they would be really interested in the author, and they would sit attentively, and they would go through the line, and many of them were so overcome they could hardly ask a question, or it was like the dumb question, I really love your book, and then you want to go out
Yeah.
and tell yourself, right, how trite could that be? Really
Mhm.
trite. But what's happened is that now that everybody is equipped with a cell phone, that it has totally changed. And now what it is an opportunity for everyone there to have a moment. And they want post photos, or they bring, and it's all about curating a story for themselves so they can post it online and say, look, I was here with Michelle
Yeah.
Richmond and you weren't, so I mean,
Yeah.
partly it's bragging rights and partly it's memento. I mean, there's
Mhm.
a lot of different, I think, emotions that go into it. So what used to be a relatively straightforward procedure can go on now forever. If
Wow, that's
I'm
interesting.
not kidding.
I hadn't
And
even
it's
thought of that.
really been a window into
Mm.
human behavior.
But you're so spot on about that, about the curation of the life and how, and an Instagram account is often, I love Instagram. I'm always scrolling through Instagram, but we don't, like, nobody's gonna post like their Safeway brand water,
Right.
like they're posting most people are posting the picture of the life that they want people to see. And yes, I think the where one's child goes to college is often, I think a lot of times kids would be happy just going to a town where they want to live, or a city where they want to live. But for the parents, there's definitely a status associated with where their child is admitted, which obviously we saw in the infamous college cheating scandals, that it's a curation of the parents' life where their children go to school.
Right. And if you looked at, I mean, I said we were probably going to, and I keep trying to turn this light on because why I keep disappearing here because I'm in the dark. That's a little better. If you really look at the Lori Laughlin case, you had to look at her kids. I mean, maybe even more than the parents, is that the children had taken on the same aspects. I was really shocked by the way some of the kids react, why they agreed to it. Some of them, a few of them under pressure, obviously weren't comfortable with having done it, but didn't somehow find a way to stand up and say they didn't want to. But some of them, just felt like, they were entitled. It was part of their, wonderful life, or they were already, I think Lori's daughter, if I remember right, already was a quote influencer, already had, her own social media and following and so forth. So, right there, she was willing to take the technology and take her parents enabling her to, have an advantage and use it. So where is the moral compass there? Where is the moral center of that whole story?
I think the book grapples with that question of what do we give up when our ultimate goal is to be at the highest level of achievement, or to look like we're at the highest level of achievement. What do we sacrifice as a community in terms of who we become? And what do we sacrifice for our children? So, and what do they learn from that? And I was just interested in that. I mean, I think the idea first came to me when we moved out of San Francisco, where I was accustomed to just sort of this quirky life in our little house, tiny little house by the very quirky, sort of dirty beach with the graffiti everywhere. And we moved from that to another town where lives did seem to be more curated. And And like in the book, Lena, like she goes and she drops Rory off at school and she's never wearing the right thing. And she's dropping him off in her old Jeep Cherokee. And we actually had this old Jeep Cherokee and I was always wearing the wrong thing. And it was just sort of this experience of not knowing, what the codes are of a new place. So Lena is going through that, like not understanding what the codes are, which I think anyone does when they move to a new place. So.
Well, that's absolutely true. And of course, she's already so vulnerable from the things that have happened to her.
Mm-hmm.
However, if I remember right, she hasn't come there with the prospect of living there. She's come there with a prospect of, with the obligation really of taking care of her father's estate and dealing with, all the residue of his life while she's trying to work out best path forward for her child, her career, and so forth. So I think it would be different if she'd actually relocated there with the intent of, for good. Did you toy with that when you started writing the book?
Not really, but sometimes life does imitate art. And during the process of writing this book, we moved from the Silicon Valley area to Paris, France, where we did not speak the language. We were there for work. And my son was, I had already written most of the book, but my son was thrust into a brand new school and we were thrust into a society where we really didn't know the codes. I mean, I had read The Bonjour Effect to find out like sort of which is an excellent book for anyone who ever visits France. So I knew some of the basic things, but I was not prepared for a life in an entirely new culture. So, but to get back to your question, writing the book, I was never thinking of Lena settling completely in that back in that town, because she really loved New York City. That was her home. But her husband, Fred, had always wanted them to move with Rory to the Bay Area because he thought that that's where Rory would get the fresh air and the ocean and the most opportunity. And but I didn't know when I started the book how it would end up. I'm thinking now of the last scene, which I had a lot of fun writing. I had no idea it would end up in that particular place. And that sort of, as I got through the book and got to that point, I realized that there's another book that sort of jumps off of those final moments of the Wonder Test. But I'm not sure. I guess I answered your question.
No, you did.
It just kept going.
Books take on lives of their own. I mean, oftentimes readers, think that the book that they get is the way it was always going to be. But in fact, books have many iterations and develop. But what I was thinking about is, when you move to France, I mean, my husband and I do speak French, and we spent 6 weeks in France, but you always have a kind of get out of jail free card in the sense that you're an outsider. And so if you make mistakes, if you don't figure out the codes, if you're not wearing the right clothes or the right car, or you try to visit the bakery as it's closing because you think that they should be open longer. I mean, the French have really weird hours, so everything stops at for midi. And it's very hard to be a tourist in France because you think you have like all day to go to the chateau. No, you have from 10 to 12:15, and then you're lucky you can go back at 2:30 to 4:30. It's but as long as you are an outsider and recognized as such, they don't hold you to the same standard. And so Lena has a kind of get out of jail card of her own, which is she isn't really, or at least when she arrives, she's not planning to stay there.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
true.
Even if she, shows up at school in the wrong clothes and the whole bit, she doesn't really have to care that much because, it's not that she is handicapping a whole life that, so she's
Yeah.
an outsider there in the same way that you were an outsider in Paris.
Yeah. And I think she's comfortable with being and she's comfortable with her outsider status because she's really focused on her kid. The book is a lot about just being a mom to a teenager, but especially in the aftermath of traumatic loss. So she's focused more on that. And then she gets drawn into this case that she gets to work on solving. She focused on that. So she's not really focused on her outsider status, but also she did grow up. She grew up down the hill, as her father said, because that's what the Bay Area is like. You can have a $6 million house half a mile from a shack, so she grew up around all of this, but never a part of it. But I do think I just have to say about France, and you hit on so much of the things about France, like nothing's ever open. And when you're living there with a teenager, and it's like, no, you can't go get food at 3. If you want food, we have to be out the door by 1 o'clock so we can walk there, and we have to be in, because everything's closed by 2. And then you have to, you can't go get dinner until 7 because it's not open. Even pizza, like even the Domino's, like there wasn't even a Domino's. So we thought, okay, well, at least we can get some bad pizza. But even the Domino's didn't open until 7 p.m. But I will also say that the French people were so nice. So that's the one thing that I liked about living in Paris, is that I think French people get a bad rap, but they were really nice. I mean, they're a little bit closed, but the moment they realize you're trying, they're really, generous people. So I'll say that.
Well, it's a much more structured daily situation. It's true in England too. I mean, I can remember arriving at a restaurant in England, rushing in the door at like 5 minutes to 2, and they can be quite smug about it. The French are supercilious, but the English are smug, and they would go, "Oh, lunch is off." I mean, it's like, I have a great story I could tell you about how I managed to beat the odds in Scotland acquiring morning coffee to go. It was
How did you?
Fabulous story. But, but Spain, I mean, it's just, we have become much more fluid in America. Everything's 24/7. There's a lot of pressure to be open on Sunday, for example, when, you'd really, in retail, like to have the day off. And things used to close, I mean, days had a much different structure, and I think we've gone way too far in making everything available all the time. And social media, again, allows people to have access to you. There's now an expectation that, people can text or email you, hardly ever using their phone as a phone. A good point Joanna made in our last conversation, which I hadn't really thought about. So you're never really away from people's expectation that you are right there, because we're carrying this little computer thing around.
And to your earlier point, you're never really away from that outer self that you present, because we're all different when we're just home and completely relaxed on the couch in pajamas, or at a friend's house, or completely relaxed, or a family's house, than we are when we're sort of presenting ourselves to people that we work with professionally, or friends of parents who maybe are, parents of our children's friends who are maybe acquaintances more than friends. So like, you're never, that constant accessibility means you're constantly, this sounds a little psychopathic, but you're constantly deciding, you're having to manage all those versions of yourself at all times.
That's true. No, that really is true. You do have to kind of, and if let's face it, she has been thrown into the role of a single parent, where she was not prepared for. She was a daughter, and now that role has gone because her father's dead, and now instead of the daughter, she's actually taking over the sort of parenting role, cleaning up, what her father has left behind. So, and then her job has she's had to take a break from that. So she's in a whole lot of transitional states here.
Mhm.
And in a new, well, it may have been where she was a kid, but she's come back to a place that's quite different.
Yes,
And
it's
she's
almost
brought a child that
unrecognizable.
she needs to be nurturing and guiding and so forth. So, I think she's in a remarkably complex place with these multiple roles going on. So one of the things I love about, I used to call it mystery, and now I call it crime novel. I'm much more Dickensian or Russian or whatever you want to call it. But one of the great things about it is such a fluid form. It's such an umbrella form that you can take all kinds of stories and call them crime fiction.
Mhm.
But in fact, they are much, much broader. And they also are a form of fiction where you can really examine, ethical, moral compass issues, dilemmas that people have. What is justice as a concept?
Mhm.
What makes people do some of the stuff? And, right at the moment, we are in this absolute tsunami of fiction about race and about immigration and about cultural identity and about cultural appropriation. And, that I think that some of this other stuff gets lost right at the moment. But these things tend to peak and then, we kind of move in a new direction. And we're a bookstore that really is not political. And we have always been more focused on, I don't want to say entertainment because that sounds really shallow, but more on enhancing people's lives with good things and rather than pursuing a lot of negative things.
And isn't
So-
a book a good thing? Oh, just a book, just when you find that book that you
Yeah.
want to shut the door for, like you want to be like, no, like I don't want to make dinner right now or have dinner right now,
Right.
or sorry, I don't want to come watch the movie. I can't answer the phone. I just want to be with this book. That's such a joy.
It absolutely is. And that is how your book affected me. But, you can examine an awful lot of life and life's lessons, because this is a book that's really looking at, a woman trying to reorient herself, trying to get to grips with all her changed circumstances. She's grieving, she's, all these things we've talked about. And I think, if you add in the mystery element and you raise the stakes, it makes the book more gripping than if you wrote it as kind of a more general examination without any driving plot.
Yeah, and that is what I love. That's what I love about reading crime, but it's also what I love. Like, so even though my previous books haven't been specifically crime books, like one of them started with a child disappearing on a beach. And for me, I love reading this kind of book, and I enjoy the technical work and also the play of writing, the playing aspect of writing them, because there is, it's like you say, there is nothing that you cannot examine in a book that's centered on a kind of crime. I mean, you get to the motivations for the person who commits the crime, but you also can plumb the depths of the character, all of the characters around it, those who are victimized, those who are trying to fix it, solve it, those who are pretending that it's not happening. Why are they looking away? There's so much that you can do, and you can always, in the joy of writing for me is, what are you going to put together that hasn't been put together exactly that way before? Like, what are the disparate elements that are all going to come into your book? And that's sort of the complicated part. It's the messy part, but it's also the fun part.
Well, it is the fun part. And, there's mystery is evolved into murder mystery. And the truth is there are plenty of wonderful crime novels in which there are no murders. Nobody dies. There are all kinds of other crimes. You can look at Trollope in the Eustace Diamonds. It's about a theft. Dorothy Sayers wrote a really fabulous short story about, well, I'd give it away, but anyway, lots of the golden age crime writers, they didn't write murder mysteries. They wrote about blackmail, and they wrote about, other kinds of basically, social issues. Or you could have something like To Catch a Thief, the great Hitchcock movie, which is basically a heist story. It's not like people are dying. The stakes there are they going to get away with the robbery? Are they going to execute the robbery? And will they get away with it? Which is not unlike The Sting. So there are all kinds of things you can explore in crime fiction. And, it's a mistake to just limit it to a murder mystery.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And, so I love finding one in which, a murder is either not the core of the book or doesn't even happen at all. And it reminds us of, really, it's a human condition that a crime novel can explore the highs and lows, and the goods and the bads, and why people do things, and what the stakes are.
Yeah.
The other great thing about it is, Michelle, that you get to learn cool stuff. And I've always thought that mystery readers are also really curious, and they want to learn about things they don't necessarily know about. Coming back to the entertainment value, they get to do it in a way that is more pleasurable, let's say, than plowing through some kind of encyclopedia article or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you get to visit great places. And, I really loved visiting the Bay Area with you, because it's, as I say, it's not the Bay Area that I know, and I haven't had any real reason to keep up with it. So here was my chance. And there were a lot of things about the plot, about the correlate that we talked about earlier, that I found to be similar.
Oh, about which the book, the plot? Oh,
yeah, the plot.
Yeah.
But there were
in my brain, I heard the plot, not the title of the plot. So it took me a minute.
Right. No, but she got to talk about a lot of interesting things, that didn't fall into any particular pattern. I don't like talking about genre much. We don't put labels on our books. We have it's just all fiction. We don't try to segregate it over and say, here's the romantic suspense, and over here's the noir, and over here's the adventure book. And
well, thank goodness. That's how I feel when I read. I just what's in the book, because when you try to just slot it into one thing, you're going to miss some other aspect of the book. Like with this one, one of the most fun part of the, how do I say this? One of the scenes I had the best time writing was about a runner, and it's not something that technically has to be there for the plot. This special race that happens in San Francisco that doesn't actually happen. I just made it up. But the joy of writing about this race and how much pleasure Lena's father takes from watching the race. Like, to me, that if you're just thinking, okay, about how you line up the plot of a novel, that sort of scene would be taken out. But as a writer, that is what inspires me to keep writing. But also as a reader, those sorts of moments in a book inspire me to keep reading as much. I want to know what happens next. I always want to know that, but I love those little asides that I couldn't have ever possibly expected, just knowing what the trajectory of the story or the premise is. Like, what is that other thing that I had no idea the author would go there? I love finding that in a book.
Well, I like finding it in a book too, but it must be fun for you as a writer to be able to put it in a book.
Yeah.
Because you had to enjoy writing it for me to enjoy reading it. Yeah. So that's a really good thing. Now, did I hear you say magical words? Like there is another story here for Lena?
There is. So I'm writing the next Lena book now, and it will be set in Paris because I tend to write about where I live. And so several of my books were set in San Francisco. My first couple were set in Alabama on the Gulf Coast where I grew up. And this one is Silicon Valley. And then the next one will be Paris. And it will be Lena and Rory in Paris. And Yeah.
Wonderful.
That's all
Well,
I can
I have a
say.
staff member who maintains that Paris is a magical word, and she keeps always, we have one table at the Poison Pen, which is Paris, 12 months a
Really?
year. And if you look around, it's astonishing how many books have Paris in the title. I try to expand it so we go to other parts of France. For example, I love Martin Walker's Bruno, Chief of Police series. If you have not read Bruno, I'm going to recommend to you my very favorite French series. I'll send you an email and let you know what it is, but you will absolutely, it's set in the Périgord and the Dordogne, and it's just magnificent. And then a woman named M.L. Longworth has written a terrific set of books set down in Arles. And, so I expand, and there's another great one set in Brittany. So I expand Paris to basically be France, but I can't really argue with Susan because that table of books is constantly turning over.
Well,
There's something.
on your Paris table, do all of the books have Paris in the title, or are they
Well,
just they're set-
originally that was her concept, but then I have come along and expanded it to other parts of France. And then when I'm not around, she contracts it back to
Oh,
Paris.
she
But
just goes
there's
straight
an
back.
astonishing array of books that do have the word Paris in
Yeah,
the title.
that's
So,
interesting.
and it embraces, I mean, it's certainly not all crime. I mean, there's a lot of women's fiction, a lot of romance, a lot of World War II stories.
Mhm.
It's a huge number of World War II stories. And of course,
Yeah, there's a
France is
lot
one of
of
the
that.
places those come
Yeah.
from. So anyway, I'm thrilled to hear there will be another book. Patrick, let us summon you up and see if you have questions or comments from the audience or whatever. Here he comes, the magic of Zoom.
I like between good and evil lies reality. Defend or dispute that statement. What were some of your favorites? I mean, have you guys really talked about that too much yet? No.
Yeah. So Patrick is, for the audience, Patrick is talking about every chapter opens with a test question from the Wonder Test. And those were so much fun to write. And I have had, my book club that I've been seeing for a year, we're a book club, but we hadn't seen each other in a while because of the pandemic. But every time I have a book come out, my book club kindly reads my book. And so one of my friends in book club was asking me, well, what are the answers? Do the questions have answers? And they don't. And I have gotten emails from readers saying, I was looking on Google, I couldn't find the answers. And that's because there aren't any answers. But you asked Patrick what my favorite questions are. And let me see. Is it better to do the right thing for the wrong reason or the wrong thing for the right reason? Using diacritical logic, chart your answer. Or David Bowie once said, it's not who does something first that matters, but who does it second. Explain why he was right using historical examples from the hard sciences. But so there's no right answers. These questions really came from doing homework with my son when he was in elementary and middle school. And just like my head was always exploding, like how is a child expected to answer these questions?
I really love this one. If a highly infectious disease strikes the ship's captain and officers on the open sea, what percentage of the crew must approve before the diseased men can be thrown overboard? Discuss the ethical implications of this decision. It reminds me a little bit of The Life of Pi, for example. But
oh yeah, I love that book.
Yeah, but I had, what percentage of the crew has to agree before they throw the old person overboard? And you could go all the way back up to the native culture in Alaska, where if an elderly person was unable to keep up, they would leave them behind, where they could peacefully freeze to death. At least it wasn't brutal. Yeah. But that's a fabulous question.
I love this one. And then we'll go on to some audience questions. T.S. Eliot wrote, if you're not in over your head, how do you know how tall you are? In 7 paragraphs, accompanied by visual aids, illustrate this tenet with an example from your own experience. That's pretty wonderful.
I think that was just kind of poking fun at college admissions essays where, like it has to be your experience, but you have to bring in all the other stuff too. And somehow it all has to magically go together.
Let's see here from the audience. Karen, she says, has anyone else read Californian psychologist Madeline Levine or Levine's The Price of Privilege? It's nonfiction and timely and talks about these pressure cookers and the effects of family. And then she says, I'm so intrigued by the premise of this novel, your novel. Are you familiar with the book that she's referencing here?
I've heard of that book, but I haven't read it, but it sounds like I should.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's see.
The Price
Okay,
of Privilege, it's called, right?
Price of Privilege by, I think it's Madeline Levine. That does look good. And let's see, Darla has a couple questions. She says, well, you've answered some of this partially, but she says, how long did it take you to write this book? You mentioned it was written a couple of years ago.
Yes. So I just heard a bang upstairs. That's why I was distracted for a moment. I think it probably took, I always think about a book for a long time before I actually start writing it. So I was probably drafting it for 2 years. And then after that, revising for at least another year. So I would say all told, probably 3 years. But the idea of the book came to me long before I ever started writing it. And I wrote other books in between after that. And part of that was because I didn't want to write about an FBI agent yet. So,
Do you anticipate writing the book that will come after this for Lori? Will it take you as long?
no, because I promised it to my publisher very soon. So as my wonderful new publisher, I was with Random House for 5 books, and I recently moved to Grove Atlantic, and they've been amazing. And as my editor and publisher said, you might want to not go so long between books. And I think he's right. And so
Is that Morgan Intrican?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I cannot say enough about how he just completely embraced this book in all of its strangeness. And Barbara was talking about how you don't like to just slot something into a very specific genre. And Morgan was very open to that, like that the book was different from other books he had read. And he liked that about it, that it wasn't, just like very specifically in one very straight genre. So
Well,
People
we
are
like that
fired
about
up.
it too.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, Darla also is talking about how much she is enjoying the audio book version, and in particular the narrator. How do you like it? Did you think
I have not listened to the whole book, Darla, but I really like the narrator, and I find her voice very Therese. I think it's Therese Plummer. I find her voice very pleasing, and it's not too up or down. It's kind of has I feel like it has the authority of the narrator, because Lena has a lot of authority, and she's a pretty tough agent. And I feel like the narrator pulls that off. So I will probably listen to the whole book at some point, but I just haven't done that yet. But I'm glad you liked the narration, Darla.
That's about it, Barbara.
All righty. Well, this has been a real treat to have a chance to both meet you, read your book, and now talk to you, Michelle. So I hope we can continue this. I didn't even mention that one reason I like this book so much is that she has such a wonderful writing style. I read for voice more than I read for anything else. If I'm bored by the voice, I don't actually care how clever the plot is, because I've lost interest already. And I do think that you have a wonderful voice.
Thank you so much.
Well,
thank you. I really appreciate it.
I can only thank you, but I'm really excited to know. I agree. I think there needed to be at least one more story for her.
Yeah.
So
What's coming?
Good. And
For
if
your
you
Paris table.
if you've overcome your, which I think, very very reasonable and rational wish not to write about an FBI agent, but now that you've made the plunge,
Yeah.
you know, that actually viewpoint character would give you lots of opportunities that so you can explore some amazing things. Anyway, as we've said, this is our September crime book of the month. The members automatically get it, but we do have some spare copies thanks to Michelle's generosity in signing the books for us. And I really encourage you. This is a book where you have no entry issue. You don't have to have read anything else. You can just pick it up and really enjoy it. So thank you so much. There will be a podcast available of this conversation probably tomorrow. And the interview, the video is going to live on our Facebook page forever. So if you who are watching it know anybody you think would really enjoy it, please direct them to the podcast or to the video.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I loved talking with you. I really appreciated your questions, and thank you.
It was a very great pleasure. I'll send you the links to all of those things tomorrow. So good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
There we go. All right, we're not live anymore, so have a
Okay.
great night.
Thank you. That was so fun. I appreciate it.
You're right. You know, it's so hard to talk about a book that you have to presume most people haven't read. And if we had more time, we've done this a few times. If we had more time, we'd love to do like follow-up Zooms, you know, like 3 months later when people have had a sporting chance to.
Oh yeah, that would be fun.
Well, you know, I think it's such a great idea, but the difficulty is that you know, to keep up with the ongoing publications, there's only so much time, and it's hard to fit them in. So, but I am thinking of trying something. Patrick and I were talking about. I haven't had a chance to write it up today, Patrick, but I will tomorrow. About taking the September, October, November crime books of the month, and instead of giving them a book in December, inviting them to a Zoom meeting to talk about the books as a whole.
That's
Did
fun.
they like them and so forth. And while I normally don't want to ask an author in because it's hard for people to be really candid about the book, I think with you it'd be really safe to do that. I don't anticipate any. So if you'd be interested in it, if we
I'd
bring
love
this
to,
up,
yeah.
I think it would be really great to bring you in. We could talk about that. Over the years, we have found that our discussion clubs do better without the author. But I think
because people can say what they really think.
Yeah, exactly.
What else might be
I-
fun? I was just going to say what might be fun is to have Michelle or another author or somebody come in and talk about a couple of the books that they've really liked this last year. And
Yeah,
we sometimes do that during the course of the program, but
Mhm.
that might be fun too.
Yeah, well, there's a
It
lot of
definitely gets
possibilities. We don't need to sell books. We're a not-for-profit bookstore, so I haven't even mentioned that, but we don't need to sell books in December because we're already overwhelmed by a book that we might not get. I don't even want to go there. But anyway, I'm
New Diana Gabaldon novel.
we're the Outlander bookstore. and it's
She lives
just
here
like-
in town.
We're
Yeah.
at something like 24,000 pre-orders.
Oh my goodness.
I know it, and
That
I
was-
don't know
so do you-
how we're.
Do you have to hire extra staff?
Yeah.
We're
to
going to
take-
have to hire an extra company. There is no way. We're currently still trying to move a 3,500 book event out the door that ran late because the publisher screwed up. And the
Wow.
problem is that then we can't be fair to all the other authors and all the other things that we should be doing. And you know, Patrick, I realized that if we gotten the damn thing on time, we could actually have gotten it out by pub date. That's what's so annoying. I mean, right now, because of COVID, nothing is going super well in terms of printing and delivery. John Connolly's book, Patrick, they're moving it because they can't get it printed in time. I just heard
that
from
right?
the publisher, and that's happening increasingly. You're lucky that your book came out on time.
Yeah, I do feel lucky. I saw on Twitter just a writer acquaintance on Twitter in July saying her book was stuck in the Suez Canal.
Yeah. Well,
And that's
Really?
on one of those
it's
ships
paper
that
they
was
can't, you know, the
backlogged
ports
behind
are
them.
all overclogged. The paper supply, thanks to the tariffs in Canada and other stuff, is a mess. Printing companies went bankrupt. during, you know, the worst of the pandemic, and there aren't enough printers, and the whole delivery system is just so overstrained and will get worse, especially with people going back to more online because of the, you know, the variants and so forth. So it's really going to be a brutal fall. I'm glad your book came out in August, because, you know, you won't get caught in all of that. But anyway, my point was, we don't actually need to sell books in December, so maybe we can just do some fun stuff. So I'll be in touch. I'll send you the names of those books set in France, because
Oh, please do. Yes.
if you have never read Bruno, Chief of Police, and the subsequent books, you will absolutely love me forever for recommending them.
Oh, good.
God.
Please do. Yes.
Yeah, they're really wonderful. And the Longworth books too, and then the Brittany books, I think, are fun. Although the Brittany books are actually written by an executive at Macmillan who's German, who holidays in Brittany. So it was shattering to realize that this wonderful
not his real name.
is actually translated from
I'm going to
German.
guess they didn't translate those books into French, because I don't think the French would be very receptive.
I don't know. I mean,
Cara Black too. You might like her.
Oh yeah, she's a friend.
Oh,
Yes.
Cara.
She's
Yeah, no, Cara's wonderful.
she's local to the
Right.
Bay Area, but I saw her a couple times when I was living in France, because she comes over every 6
Sure.
months to do research for the next book.
Right. But you're back now from France, right?
Yes.
Well, I knew
Permanent.
you were, because we're talking, you know, in
Yeah.
what would have been the middle of the night for you.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's really been a pleasure, Michelle. Thank you
It
so
has
very
been.
much. And we really
Thank
appreciate your
you.
signing the books as well.
Oh, well, thank you. I was happy to always.
Great. Bye.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Nice to meet you both.